Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on budget development for the 2021 NCAI Fund Victim Services Microgrant Program. My name is Esther Labrado, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians and a descendant of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. And today's webinar is co-hosted by the National Congress of American Indians Fund, the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and First Pick Incorporated. And myself, I'm a staff attorney at NCAI. I just want to welcome everyone today. Before we get started, I just want to thank everyone for your interest in the program. I know we have some attendees who have already applied, and we hope to get award notifications out in the coming weeks. And today's webinar really provides some important information for the next step in that process once you are awarded. So I know it might seem early to be attending, but it's great that you're here today. We also might have some folks joining who've not yet applied to this program. And I just want to let you know we are still accepting applications. You can go to tribalvictimservices.org, which we'll put up on the slide later, in order to apply. And I also want to just give a heads up. So in the application process, you'll be asked to submit a summary budget. And that can be, as its name implies, summary. It can be pretty simple. You don't have to provide as much detail as we will be talking about today. And we're happy to answer any questions on that, but just wanted to give everybody a heads up that if you've not yet applied, just know that your summary budget does not require as detailed of information that we'll cover today. So before we begin, we'll go over some housekeeping tips just to make sure everyone knows how to participate in today's webinar. So on your screen, you should see the viewer window. That's where the PowerPoint is displayed. And to the right of that, you should see a control panel, which you might not see. If you don't see it, it'll look like the one right there on the slide. If you don't see it, look for the small orange arrow. And if you click on that, it will open the control panel and you'll be able to see the various options. At the top of the control panel are your audio controls. And you can either join by phone or through your computer. If you want to join by phone, you will need to select the option next to use telephone, and that will then display the dial-in information and your audio pin. Below that is also your questions box, and that's where you can go ahead and type in any questions throughout the presentation. We'll be monitoring it throughout, and we'll stop and we'll answer any questions we can. We will also have some time at the end to answer any additional questions. You can type in your questions either in that questions or chat box, or you can use the raise your hand feature, which is an icon of a hand with a green arrow pointing upwards. And that's below that little orange arrow, which again opens and closes your control panel. We also want to let everyone know that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it on our website. Again, that's www.tribalvictimservices.org for you to view later. And for anyone who's joining us for the first time on this program, we do have our previous webinars also posted on that website as well. Again, that's tribalvictimservices.org, and we'll put that information up on the PowerPoint number 8 there. Finally, I wanted to also let everyone know we have some handouts for today's webinar, and that's also in your control panel in the handouts box. And we have 3 handouts, and then we have a PDF of today's PowerPoint. Next slide, please. Great. So again, we just want to thank everyone for joining us. Welcome. As you can see here, the goal of today's webinar is really to provide an overview and some guidance of the detailed budget submission process. So as I mentioned, this is the second step in the process. So if you've already submitted your application, we are in the process of reviewing them. Once you get your award notification, if you are awarded, you will then begin this detailed budget development process. And that's within what we refer to as the online reporting system or the online reporting site, the ORS. So we'll be walking through that today. Again, once you are awarded, you'll receive login and information so that you can access the website that we'll be covering today. And so today we'll just be walking through how to submit your detailed budget, talking about some of the nuances of the system, and then providing some guidance of other things to think about. Perfect. And so I just want to give, again, kind of to orient you to sort of where we are in the process. This slide lays out the various steps. And just, again, if there's anyone joining us who's not yet applied, this slide skips over the first couple steps. And we just encourage you to go ahead and check out some of our previous webinars. Essentially, you submit your application, we review it, we'll send out the award notifications, which is on this slide, that upper left-hand corner box. Then you'll begin to do your detailed budget development process. Once you submit that, again, through this online reporting system, we'll go ahead and review it. We'll reach out to you if you have any questions. Our ultimate goal is to provide as much technical assistance as possible. We have partnered with both the Tribal Law and Policy Institute and First Pick Incorporated to be able to answer any and all questions. So we'll work with you if you need any assistance developing your detailed budget, and then you'll receive your letter of, once your budget is approved, you'll receive your letter of award and begin to actually start your programming. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our primary presenter, which is Robin Patterson. She's a project manager at First Pick Incorporated. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today. Go ahead, Robin.
Hi, everybody. Again, so I'm Robin Patterson. I'm a project manager at First Pick. I am just one of several people that make up what we call our finance team at First Pick. And all of us are very excited to be working with all of you and are more than happy to provide any assistance that you need during this process of budget development. So, you may hear from me, or it may be another member of my team. Might be Matt or Caitlin, Daryl or David. We all sort of interwork with each other. Once everybody has received their application or their award notifications, we'll make assignments out so that you will have a primary point of contact for that at First Pick. So I do know that one of the things throughout this process is you do work with several people, whether it be at NCAI or with TLPI or First Pick, but we do our best to sort of assign everybody, at least for finance, a main point of contact. You're always welcome to contact anybody at First Pick for any assistance during this process, but just so that you will have a primary person that will focus on helping you out specifically. But again, you're always welcome to talk with any of us. So that being said, I want to get started with the subject matter at hand, which is you're developing your detailed budget. So one of the things to be aware of when developing your detailed budget is what exactly can I use these funds for? So some examples of things are listed here that you can use funds for, which is actually a pretty wide range of things. It actually is very expansive. Too much to us to get into complete detail on it because everybody's programs are very different. So just some ideas are listed here. Definitely personnel, a person, a victim advocate to be able to help provide support and run your program is very important, but just all the other aspects that may go along with that. The funding amounts for these grants are going to range anywhere from about $25,000 to $150,000. So obviously, depending on where you fall in that range is going to determine, what works best for your program. There's a link here at the bottom of this slide that actually is a very detailed information document that details out all of the allowable versus unallowable costs that would be for this program. That definitely, as you are working through developing your budget, we recommend that you take a look at that to just help give you some more guidance on the kinds of expenses that you could cover. Some other things about some more specific detailed drill down things that the funding can be used for, as I already talked about, it can cover salary and fringe benefits for staff members that are working on this. This may be a full-time staff member that you hire specifically for this program, or it might just be a percentage of time or some hours that someone you already have on staff is going to devote to this program. So that could vary in different ways, but definitely the salary and fringe benefit for staff working on this program, travel that is related to this program. That could be, you know, your victim services advocate going out into the community to provide services. It could be travel to trainings. It could be a number of different things that could be related to. So equipment, we have seen a fair share of people that have been purchasing vehicles. We do know that a lot of you folks, your communities are in far from other services that can be provided, and so transportation can sometimes be an issue for people that don't have cars. So that is one thing that different people have included in this particular program, is vehicles to be able to provide that service to victims, to get them to, you know, court hearings or different things like that. Security systems for the facility itself where you'll be serving victims. Minor construction, this one I want to hit on. So this one is, this is an area that has been something that has come up with a number of things. The difference between minor construction and major renovation becomes a thing. If you are uncertain whether whatever you are needing to do or want to incorporate falls under minor construction or something that, as we're going to come to, is not allowable, which would be a major renovation, just feel free to reach out to one of us. If we can't provide guidance on the information you have, we'll certainly connect you with someone who can better determine that. So minor construction costs would be that. So facility costs, this one is where it gets a little bit trickier too. So if you've got rental space or utilities, those can be included provided they are not already included in the costs that were used to negotiate your indirect cost rate, and you're including your indirect costs in your budget. So if those were already taken into account when that was calculated, then those are already going to be covered under your indirect cost rate, and you cannot include them again as a direct cost. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but otherwise, if they are something that's separate and they haven't been taken into account with that, those can also be included. There's a whole variety of supplies that can be included in this budget, whether it's computers, printers, cell phones, anything that you would need to outfit an office for an advocate to work for you that they may need in order to be able to help oversee the program. There's also a lot of different things in the way of the cultural and therapeutic practices. All those types of items to enable those things to occur are definitely allowable. Food is something that is kind of new to being allowable. So in as much as food was allowable previously under the aspect of, like, if you were going to be providing emergency food supplies to a victim that needed them, they'd been displaced further from their home and they needed access to food. But now, as a larger part, they are also, if you've got cultural or traditional activities that would be supporting this program, food for those types of things can also be included in your budget. Emergency needs for victims, those can be a variety of things, from emergency housing to emergency food, possibly even things like toiletries, clothing, different things like that. Other areas of program operating costs, subcontracts that possibly you are going to be working with some legal advocates, and so you would have some subcontract or procurement costs related to that, or other types of counseling for victims. And then, of course, indirect costs are also available or allowable to be included. A few things that aren't allowable. So this list on here is much shorter. So anything related to law enforcement or prosecution cannot be included in this budget. Crime prevention measures cannot be included for this particular program. Offender services that are not related to victimization. And again, as we talked a little bit about, major construction or purchase of real estate is not something that can be funded through this program. Lobbying, fundraising, and then travel expenses that would not be authorized. So anytime you would have travel, I mentioned, to like trainings or meetings, those events all have to be pre-approved through by the NCAI fund. folks to determine whether or not it directly relates to your program, and thus that travel would fall under this particular program. And again, here's the link to the more expansive allowable, unallowable costs. So that is kind of a really broad picture of everything related to this program as far as allowable and unallowable. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about how do you actually enter your detailed budget into the online reporting site, as well as just a little more in-depth information on some of those things we just talked about. So this is the screen that you would get when you're signing in to the online reporting site. Once you receive your notice of award, you will be given access to this reporting site. So that's at what stage in this process you will get access to the site. So this is your login page. Always keep in mind that if you forget your password, you can always just click forgot password and it will send you a link to reset it. When you do that, please make sure that you do check your spam or your junk email folders, because frequently those emails do land there. And folks sometimes I don't normally look there for things, but do keep that in mind if you do ever have to reset your password, to check those boxes for that. Once you log in, this is the screen you're going to see. This is what we call your dashboard. In order to start or initiate your budget, there's a couple different ways to do that. This first way is you go right up here to the subgrants tab and select that, and to drop down to subgrants. You're going to come to this page, which is going to list your subgrant. So you just click on this subgrant right here, and that is going to open up your screen. To this, you're going to click the Update Budget button. Once you click Update Budget, you actually get this screen where you can have two different options to select. When you're first developing your initial budget, what you want to select is the one that is Update Budget with the indirect costs. We will provide some additional training later on to talk about how to submit a budget update or revision once your budget's been approved, but upon the initial and start of this, you do the update budget and indirect cost rate. So I apologize. I had something just happen at the corner of my eye that distracted me. When doing the information we'll provide later becomes important about which one of these you select, that once you've included your indirect budget, so that more information will be provided later. So if your tribe has an approved NICRA, this is where you're going to enter this rate. Please make sure that you do have an updated approved NICRA. You are going to have to upload that documentation to the budget. If you have questions about what you have on hand, you're always welcome to email us outside the system, send us what you have as a documentation and ask if this is what we need, if it's the most up-to-date. If you don't have one, we do realize that over the last year, due to the pandemic, there are a few people that do not have their NICRA updated recently because it's based on audits, and some of that is kind of behind due to the pandemic and all that. So definitely, if you have any concerns about anything like that, do reach out to us. We're happy to help work through that to the best of our ability to make sure that you can have what you need to be able to do this. So this is where you enter your NICRA. If you do not have a negotiated indirect cost rate, you can choose to use the 10% de minimis rate, and this is what you would enter here. If you're not going to use de minimis and you don't have an indirect cost rate, you can put 0 here. Please do just enter numbers and not the percentage sign. The system will automatically interpret that as a percentage. Something to note here as well is the system does only allow 2 different choices for doing indirect costs. You can either do indirect costs on just personnel and fringe, or you can do indirect costs on all expenses. We do know that some people have, according to their negotiated rate, it is based only on salary. If your negotiated indirect cost rate is only included on salary, please just enter a 0 here. and then reach out to First Pick. There's a little bit different way that we'll ask you to include your indirect costs within your budget. So do check that out too, and make sure you're reaching out to us if that is the case. But if that is, just enter 0 right here. So the budget is automatically going to default to including that indirect cost rate on all expenses. If your indirect cost rate is based on only personnel and fringe costs, you simply would need to just uncheck this button. And again, as I mentioned, you will need to upload a copy of your NICRA with your budget details, and we will cover a little bit later on how to do attachments. So if you're going to be including an indirect cost rate in your budget, please make sure again that you're checking to see what the basis was for that negotiated rate. If you had already included things like rent or utilities when you negotiated that rate, those are not going to be able to be included as direct costs. So make sure you're double checking that. And if you're not including an indirect rate, but a de minimis, then you certainly can include a portion of those costs. For instance, one of the things, like if your indirect cost was based on certain things like rent and utilities, but it's based on buildings that you already have. And for this particular program, you know you're going to have to go out and rent a whole separate space for this for certain aspects, maybe like in this case, doing a victim support group. Those can be included as a direct cost. So again, if you're running into any of those situations and you're not sure what to include or how to include it, definitely just reach out to us, and we're very happy to help you navigate those certain particulars. So here's some things. What should you consider when you're drafting your budget? So first, we've got personnel costs. And so one thing you'll want to think about is, well, how many staff will I have working on this project that I would like to include in my budget? Secondly, are these staff going to be full-time, or are we just going to be charging part of their time to this program? Are the staff hourly or salaried? And that makes a difference. You'll see a little bit later when we start talking about how to enter these into the system, why it makes a difference. And again, do just keep in mind that the costs that you're going to be putting in here are still going to be estimates for the most part. So for instance, maybe you haven't hired the victim advocate yet, so you're really not 100% certain exactly how much money they're going to make, what their salary is going to be. At this point, we just want you to put in your best guesstimate. Get as close as possible as you can. It does become a little bit flexible once things get moving through the system, but you do need to have sort of a pretty good idea of a starting point. Again, we are very happy to work with you on that later as you're developing it if you have questions. Again, so are they going to be working 100% on the program or just a portion of their time? Will they be starting to work from the very start, or are you're going to have to advertise for the position and then interview and hire? So this is going to matter when we start talking a little bit later on entering it as to the number of weeks the person will work on the program. So fringe benefits can also be included. So what fringe benefits do you want to include, if any? So this is absolutely up to you. We have some people that just choose to enter FICA. We have some people that they put all of their fringe in here, from their FICA, their workman's comp, state unemployment, all their insurances, everything goes in here. It's just really it's really up to you what you want to include to be reimbursed for when it comes to these expenses. I highly recommend, if within your summary budget and within your original application, that your idea was that you would definitely charge all of your fringe benefits to the program, because you are certainly allowed to do so. Then I would encourage you to be able to do that. Do keep in mind, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, that when it comes to things like state unemployment and workman's comp, you are going to need some documentation to verify those rates that will need uploaded to your budget as well. So then moving on, once you do here, you're going to click, in order to add staff, you click the button down here to add staff. it's going to bring you to this view right here. And the first thing you're going to enter is their name, or excuse me, not their name, the title of their position. So whether it's going to be your victim advocate coordinator, your program coordinator, something, you don't want it to be too long, just something short but descriptive here. Again, please do not include names. One of the reasons we don't do that is if you're including actual names in your budget, if you do have staff turnover, it requires you to do a budget update to accommodate for that, which it can be a process. So if it could be avoided in a situation like this, that's always the way that we work it. So what will happen is at the reimbursement request level, if you do have staff turnover, you would just indicate that in a reimbursement request when that happens. So this is why we don't include the actual names of your positions in the budget here. Next, this is where you're going to determine whether they're an hourly or a salaried person. This is a drop-down menu that you can click on, and then you would choose whether they're hourly or salary. Here, for an hourly person, you'll enter their hourly rate of pay, and if it's a salary person, you're going to enter their annual salary. Next, what you're going to enter is the total number of hours that the employee works per week. So if this is a full-time employee, this would be 40 hours per week. Maybe you're only going to hire a part-time employee. Maybe you're hiring somebody that's going to work 100% on the program, but they're only going to work 20 hours a week. So that's what you would put here. So this is the total number of hours that this person is going to work, whether it's on this program, a combination of programs, whatever the case may be, it's total hours that this person works. And the next one, grant hours per week. This is how many hours they're going to actually work on this program. So if they are a full-time employee working 40 hours a week and they're going to work 100% on this program, this is going to be 40 hours. If they're a full-time employee, but so they work 40 hours a week, but only 20 of them will be on the grant, then this will be 20 hours. The number of weeks on grant is automatically going to default to the whole entire program period, and that is goes back to actually the start of the initial program when NCAI first started this. You're definitely going to want to adjust this accordingly, and that's where I talked about giving in mind whether or not you're going to have to go through a hiring process to bring this person on board. If so, you're going to want to take that into consideration. From this program goes through the end of June of 2022, so kind of calculating out about how many weeks that looks like that'll be, and then adjust this accordingly. If you have more than one staff person working on the program, this does not have to be the same for all staff members. So maybe you have somebody on board that's going to be able to start immediately in one capacity, and so they will have more weeks here, but then you have another person that you know you're going to hire, but you're pretty sure you're maybe not going to hire them until you actually get the program off the ground a little bit more, so maybe they're not going to start till August. So you can adjust this, and this can be a different number of weeks on grant for the different personnel that will be working for your program. And that's what I just covered on that. So just make sure that the number of weeks on grant does actually reflect and accordingly for each position. So the system is going to automatically calculate the amount allocated to the grant based on the information in the payroll system when doing your fringe benefits portion. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you're not required to include fringe benefits in your budget, so you can choose to leave any or all of this blank. It's just really up to you. The top line of the fringe benefits, this is really related to the insurance costs that are going to be based on premiums. So what you want to put here is you want to enter the full annual premium that the employer will pay. So the system is later going to, like I said, automatically calculate and adjust that based on the percentage of time on the program. So this is a place where it does sometimes cause confusion with people. They'll just put in like the monthly rate. Do definitely make sure that you're putting in the full annual premium. So again, even if the person is maybe you chose that this person is only going to work 30 weeks on the grant, again, the system will automatically calculate that. You don't need to prorate that annual amount for just that many weeks. Definitely just put in the full annual amount for all of these items. And second, these are things more like payroll taxes. These are fringe benefits that are paid on a percentage of the salary. So this is going to be, so your FICA, which is, FICA is the Social Security and Medicare combined. I mentioned that just because there is a little bit of confusion sometimes. Some folks think of FICA as just being Social Security, but it is definitely your Social Security and your Medicare combined. So that's going to be 7.65. There's no documentation needed for that because that's a federal guideline, right? Everybody follows that regardless. So there's no additional documentation needed for that. However, if you're going to enter something under SUTA, which would be your state unemployment, your workers' comp, or retirement, we are going to need some documentation that verifies what that rate got set as. And again, your person is happy to work with you outside the system if necessary to make sure that we can get the proper documentation that's going to be needed for that. Once you get all those entered, you just click update amounts and it's going to automatically calculate all the totals based on the information that you put in personnel. So you're going to need notes. For everything within your budget, you are going to need to have notes. The notes kind of go back to, if any of you are familiar with, when you submit budgets, frequently there's a separate documentation where you have to include a budget narrative. The notes act as the budget narrative. And so in order to enter your notes, you simply click on this plus sign to be able to provide your information. If you have included any fringe costs in the other categories, we do need you in these notes to specify what that other category is, so it's very clear what that fringe benefit is. Once you click on the plus sign, you're going to get this little pop-up here, and this is where you're going to include the narrative information. One of the handouts that is provided with today's webinar actually gives some examples for what would be appropriate or good notes that would go along in these sections for various things you may put in your budget. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that document as you're working through your budget. It may help you out with just the type of language that you need to actually put in the notes section. One of the things you need to try to be watchful of is sometimes there are line items that get created accidentally, but they don't actually have any information in them. And in order to keep them from populating later in your budget with, usually it's just kind of an odd string of letters and numbers that populates, just be watchful of that. If you did accidentally create something, a line item for something that you don't need, you just click the checkbox and then delete that line item before you would move forward. You will notice when you're doing your budget, there's a section here that's for personnel and fringe notes. This is an area that's actually reserved for later on in the process if you ever do need to submit a budget update. So just leave those. That is nothing you need to put anything in at this point. So do just leave that section blank. If you need to add another staff member, you simply click the add button. And that will move you through. Once you're ready, you can just click update amounts, and then that's going to calculate the personnel and fringe that you have already included in your budget. If you do need to step away, maybe you've started it and now something has come up you need to go deal with, you can just hit save and then come back to this and pick up right where you left off at a later time. Once you've entered all of the necessary information, you're going to click next. And that is going to move you along to the expenses section of your budget. I'm going to pause here for just a moment and ask Esther if we have any questions that have come up.
Not yet, but I will give a quick reminder in case folks can't find that feature. So again, your control panel may have minimized itself. So look to the right side of your screen next to where you're seeing the PowerPoint, and there should be a small orange arrow. If you click on that, it will open your control panel, and that's where you can go ahead and type in any questions for us, and we'll go ahead and pause if we get any. So for now, you're all set, but thank you.
Sounds good. All right, so moving along, once you move on, you're going to notice that if you had any indirect rate expenses that are going to be, that's going to populate right here. So you'll be able to see that your indirect cost rate has been has carried forward for expenses. This is another thing. This kind of hides up there in the corner a little bit, and I know it's really easy for folks to miss. So definitely see this. This is where you're going to need to enter your procurement threshold. And this is going to be based on whatever your tribe's procurement policies are for micro purchases. So we do need you to enter that amount right there. So a little bit more about the procurement threshold. So the threshold for your micro purchases that you include in your budget does need to match your organization's procurement policy. The micro purchases you don't need actual bids, but there is going to be some other procurement documentation you will have to do for any purchases that exceed your micro purchase threshold. The federal level for this, they is set at $10,000. However, if your threshold is less than that, that is the one you need to include here. If you are interested in possibly revising your internal policies in order to raise the limit from whatever it may be so that it matches the federal policy, please do just let us know. We have some folks on staff that would be happy to help give you some guidance or advice and help you through that process of what you may need to do to increase that threshold. For now, you will need to include what it currently is, but then at a later time that can be updated if you do get your policies and procedures internally updated. So you'll enter your tribe's micro purchase threshold, and then anytime you would make a purchase that exceeds that threshold, you are going to have to do some additional procurement paperwork. Keep in mind that, so for instance, let's say your micro purchase threshold is $5,000, and you needed to purchase, furnishings that are for the office, and you're going to purchase a desk and a chair and a file cabinet and a printer. Well, even though any of those one item individually may not exceed $5,000, if you purchase those all from the same vendor and the purchase of all the items combined exceeds $5,000, because they're being purchased from the same vendor, you will need to complete the procurement paperwork. That is something we are going to provide additional information on, again, through some other webinars and trainings that we do. And we have developed some templates that are available on the website to help with that process if needed. But again, we'll provide some additional information on that. We will be doing a financial online reporting training, which is how to submit a reimbursement request, that talks a little bit more about this. But the date and time for that has not yet been set. But we will be doing that moving forward at some point. Another thing to keep in mind, this is actually going to be more related to reimbursement requests, but one of the things when we are processing budgets for you, we not only look at budgets to see, well, what is allowable and what is not allowable, we also look at the way you're developing your budget out just to make it what is going to be the easiest for you when it comes time to submit a reimbursement request, because we definitely want to, that is kind of an undertaking unto itself. So we want to try to simplify that process for you as much as possible. So sometimes if you have a reviewer ask you to combine something or separate something or otherwise list something in your budget a little different, it is probably because of our experience with how the reimbursement request gets processed, it is going to make that process easier down the line for that. So this here information is actually a little bit more related to that, but you do want to keep these things in mind in the back of your head as you develop your budget, just so you can think through the process of, this is how I'm including it in my budget, but this is what it's going to look like for a reimbursement request. So that goes along with the procurement policy having to do with if your policies include Indian preference and how you're going to be incorporating that into any of the contracts or anything that you may do from the budget level with providers that you're working with. And again, we've got people here on staff that are able to provide assistance with that if you would need it as well. So some other tips to include when you're drafting your budget is to think about, is there going to be any travel? If you're purchasing a vehicle with these grant funds, you may also want to consider some other costs associated to that you may put into your budget. whether it's gasoline costs, insurance costs, regular maintenance, that kind of thing. If you have any staff that's going to be using their personal vehicle that they're going to be reimbursed for, that current mileage rate, according to the federal government, is 56 cents per mile. However, if you have an internal policy that is less than that, that should be the rate that you include, and you would just put in a note that indicates that. Consider any service contracts. Are you going to be getting a new cell phone with a new cell phone service plan for your staff member that's working on the program? Internet, that one is a cost that may or may not be already included under indirect costs. So that would be something to consider. Do you have virtual platform fees? So are you going to be using Zoom to help reach out to provide services to victims? If so, the fees associated with something like that could be included. If you share a portion of these, so if you run multiple programs, like you're going to do a Zoom account, but you've got 3 other programs that also use it, you can make a determination of just doing a percentage of those costs. If everybody, let's just say for instance that everybody, all the programs uses it equally, and it's going to be used across 4 programs, you could charge 25% of those costs to the program. Also include any emergency needs for your victims that you may need to do, whether it's clothing, transportation, toiletries, anything like that. And again, refer back to the allowable costs document to find any other expenses that you might want to consider. For equipment and supplies, just give some thought through all of the different equipment and supplies that you may need to purchase, whether it's file cabinets, computers, computer software, things like that. When determining whether to put these under equipment or supplies in your budget, so according to the DOJ financial guide, equipment is defined as a singular item that is $5,000 or greater with a useful life of more than 1 year. So there's probably not going to be a lot of different things that fall into this. So definitely like a vehicle would most certainly fall under equipment, because you're most likely going to be budgeting well more than $5,000 for a vehicle. But other things, even, like desks or furniture, things like that, are most likely going to just fall in the supplies category. So this is, again, a little bit related more to thought process when it comes to reimbursement requests as opposed to budgets. But at the same time, when you're thinking about contracts or subawards as far as the goals of the program and how to include that, one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later when we get on is where to enter something like you may think of it as a subcontract with, say, maybe you're going to be working with some attorneys or some counselors. But although there is a category within your budget to do a subcontractor, we do ask that you put those under procurement contracts. And so as far as your budget goes, there's really not a differentiation so much between what would be considered a procurement contract as opposed to a contract specialist. If your program is going to involve doing subawards, that again is going to fall under procurement contracts. And as you're working with your folks at TLPI or other technical assistance people, too, definitely mention that you're going to be doing subawards through this program, because there will be some additional assistance that can be provided to you on requirements around that. So gift cards. Gift cards is something we are actually, it's kind of a big thing. We're seeing a lot of it, but it's also one of the more, a little bit complicated, for lack of a better term, that comes to mind for this. There is a high level scrutiny around gift cards just because there is such a, it's something that can just very easily be mismanaged, I guess would be a pretty good term. And so they do have a high level of scrutiny should the program be audited for something like this. So there's definitely, like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, general gift cards like that are not allowed. The gift cards or vouchers do need to try to be specific to the actual need of what it is for. And it can be only for emergency needs for the victims. if at the end of the grant period, so let's just say you've gone out and you've got $3,000 worth of gift cards on hand, it's June 30th of 2022, and you still have those and haven't utilized them, you are going to need to reimburse the program $3,000. You can't just return the gift cards. You are going to have to reimburse the program back the dollar value of those. So that's, we've put in some internal measures to kind of help manage that for folks a little bit. But one of the things that will be needed before you can be reimbursed for any gift cards is you're going to have to submit a copy of your internal controls policies related to the purchasing of gift cards. If you either don't have a policy or maybe it's a policy that needs built out a little better, we're very happy to help you develop that out further. We do have some template language that we have developed related to that, but we can work with you on that moving forward. One of the other limits on this is you may only have $5,000 worth of gift cards on hand at a time that we can reimburse you for. And then there will be some additional paperwork as you disperse those. So you bought 5,000, you dispersed 3,000, you submitted some paperwork, and then we can reimburse you for some additional cards. So there's kind of a process around that. Again, this is something more related to reimbursement requests, but just keeping that in mind as you're budgeting for your gift cards. So now getting into how do you add these other expenses into your budget. So then you come here and you're going to add expense. You're going to choose the type of expense, whether it's travel, equipment, supplies, whatever the case may be. This is where you're going to choose the category that it goes into. This is where we talked about, equipment would be something that's $5,000 or more. Other things are pretty much going to be supplies. We do ask that anything, so although it lists the subawards here, we do ask that if you do have that or anything that you have procurement contract wise, that you do put into the procurement contracts line item. So once you get the category chosen, now you're going to enter the rate. So for some things, like for instance, program office supplies, maybe this is your line item that you're going to be purchasing your pens and your folders and copy paper and all that good stuff. So you're really going to just have a rate here, and maybe you determined that this is going to be $2,000 over the course of the award. So you're just going to enter $2,000. You're going to enter, and then the rate is going to be a quantity of 1. What we are going to want you to do, and I'll talk about notes here in just a minute, is in the notes, we're going to want you to provide just a little bit of information on how you came about that number. One of the reasons that that's really important is because we just want to make sure there's been a good thought process for that. We don't want somebody over budgeting for something amount of money that they're end up going to really not being able to spend. That's going to be a challenge. And so just some thought that, like, you sat down and thought about, okay, I think based on what I'm estimating, we're going to need about $200 per month for this, and we're going to be running the program for 12 months, and so that gives me this dollar amount. So we would just ask you provide that little note in the comment section that breaks that out about what the thought process was for how you got to that. The other information that we do need in the notes is a little bit of an explanation of what this expense entails. So, like, again, if this is going to be your program supplies, just a note that what you're thinking you're going to purchase with this is going to be, toner cartridges for a copier, as well as, pens, paper, and pencils and stuff. We just want to make sure that we fully understand what your intent is behind a line item that might be a little bit more generic, so that we're making sure we're actually approving what you're thinking you want to buy. The other thing to keep in mind is if, however, you are going to be putting a line item in for an item that might be more like a quantity, so like you're going to need 2 desks. So if you put desks in here, and then the rate is you're planning to spend $500 per desk, and you're buying 2 desks, then you would put this in here with a rate of 500 and a quantity of 2. So if it is something that can be broken down in a quantity like that, whether it's like a monthly charge of something or it's an item cost, we do ask that you do build that out that way so that the quantity is actually reflective. When you're adding notes, again, you'll just get this pop-up box just like you got before. You put your notes in there and then save and close. So once you get to the point where you're updating this, you're going to see this is how it's going to break out and look on your screen. And here you can see, so we have a vehicle at $10,000 for a quantity of 1. We've got a contractor, $250 with a quantity of 5. So this is where something like this, when I would look at this as a reviewer, I wouldn't quite know whether this meant this was going to be 5 contractors, but maybe it's 5 hours. So in the notes, we would just ask you to specify that, this I would say was potentially that this person is going to budget for a contractor. They're going to need 5 hours. That's 5 hours or 5 days. But just kind of an indication of, in this aspect, when it's not very clear, what does the quantity represent? And again, down at the bottom here, we've got the lump sum fee. So this is a entry is actually a little bit specialized when you were talking personal mileage. The reason that this had to be built into the system a little different is because every once in a while, every so many years, the federal mileage rate actually goes out by 3 decimal points. And because the system generally only works to the penny, there was a special entry that was built out to accommodate for this. Even though the current mileage rate is currently just 56 cents a mile, so it does just go that 2 decimals, we do ask that you use, if you're going to be putting in mileage for a personal owned vehicle, that you do include that under this add mileage category. However, if you have if you have a tribal owned vehicle and you're going to be using that vehicle for the program, reimbursement for usage of that is going to be done just via gas receipts as opposed to mileage, because it is a tribal owned vehicle as opposed to a personal owned vehicle. So you would just build that out as a line item under your travel expenses as opposed to doing mileage. And again, this talks about how, see the difference, we've got the mileage here. And for the notes, again, if you are using a lower than the federal rate, please enter a comment in the notes about that. Similar to personnel, if you accidentally created a line item for something that turns out you don't need, do just click the checkbox by it and then click delete so that it can be removed from your budget. So here's something that is a little bit different when it comes to the subawards or procurement contracts. So if you are allowed per your negotiated indirect cost agreement to recoup indirect costs off of things like procurement contracts, there is a limit that you may only claim the first $25,000. So this particular category within your budget, it's the only category that's going to allow you to adjust that amount. So if you have a line item under procurement contracts, the system is going to automatically default the amount that can be allocated indirect as $25,000. It is one of the things that it may sometimes do is it's going to default to $25,000 regardless of the amount allocated to grant. So you will want to check that. And if that particular line item is less than $25,000 already, for instance, in this one it's $750, you will want to update this amount so that it is equal to just the amount allocated to grant. So after clicking updated amounts, you're going to see that the system organizes all of your line items into their various categories. If you scroll towards the bottom at this point, you will be able to see the amount of indirect costs that are budgeted. This at any time, once you do start submitting reimbursement requests, the number 2 here is going to update based on what's been approved, and then it will let you know how much is remaining. Like I mentioned up in the personnel expense notes, this area again is just used for moving forward for things like doing budget updates. So do leave this section blank when doing your initial budget. Reviewer notes is going to be blank upon your initial review, but later on, as you're working through different things, you may see some notes from the reviewers populated there for your reference. Once you have everything built out, you just now you'd have to determine whether you needed to upload any attachments, whether it was your NICRA or your workers' comp documentation. So doing that, you scroll to the bottom and you click Upload Attachments, which is going to bring you here to a drop-down menu. You just choose the appropriate item that it is. If nothing is listed in the drop-down, just click Other. And then you're going to upload new attachment. When you get to this screen, although it gives you an option right here to enter a file name, we actually highly recommend that you just leave that blank. If you do choose to put a name in there, definitely you need to include .pdf at the end of it. There's some systems that when reviewing these, they don't readily recognize the document as a PDF document, which is a little challenging to open. So if you just leave that blank, that's actually preferred. But if you do put a name in there, please do add .pdf to the name that you give it. Then you're going to choose the file. You can search, wherever you need to on your computer, wherever to locate the file. Once you choose it, then you just click Upload, and it will upload that. If it successfully uploads, you will get the message telling you that it's successfully uploaded. If you have another document, whether maybe you are uploading a workman's comp document, but you have a couple documents for some reason to upload as workman's comp, you can upload another one. However, if you do have a different, so maybe you have a workman's comp and a SUTA, once you successfully do one, you should close out of this and then restart so that you can choose the category name again out of the drop down. So generally, we recommend that every time you upload an item, you actually close out as opposed to just upload a new item. If you do upload something in error, once you've uploaded it, you do not have the ability to delete it. But if you have uploaded something in error, it was the wrong document, just reach out to us here at First Pick, and we are happy to go into the system and delete the item that was uploaded in error. You can always check to see what it is. Once you get here, you just click on it and you can open it up and see what the documentation was. When you feel that you've got everything in it that you need to, click on the Review and Submit. One thing to be aware of for your initial budget submission, you're going to have your total awarded amount and your total budgeted amount. These numbers do not need to match exactly. We do realize that sometimes that can be a challenge when you're dealing with indirect cost rates and the like. They should be close, but they do not have to match exactly. If once you open
And
it up,
Robin,
yep.
sorry, I just wanted to add in a quick note there on the idea that those might not match exactly. And just really to emphasize that once you do get into this process, I think especially with the indirect cost rate, that can really change your amount. So just don't, I guess I just want to say, don't be too stressed if the number really doesn't match. And please feel free to, you may already have been in contact with, again, your point of contact at First Pick throughout your budget development process. But if you're not already, speaking with First Pick, and if as you go through this process and you finish and you realize those numbers are pretty far, $100 or $1,000 different, they're far apart, just connect with us. And, it's likely that it's, like I said, especially indirect cost rates, that can really make a big difference. Not a problem at all. Again, we recognize that your application budget that you submitted was a summary budget. And as you go through this process, you may realize we forgot to include this, that, or the other thing. I just want to say there is flexibility there. So just don't worry too much about it. Hopefully your summary budget is pretty close to what your detailed budget will be, but we recognize it might be different, and that's okay. please feel free to just connect with us, either First Pick or NCAI directly, and we can give any additional guidance that might be needed. So thank you, Robin. Go ahead.
Oh, sure, no problem. Thank you for adding that. So once you do get to this stage, definitely look through it, check things like make sure you do have notes and comments for every single line item within there, that your quantities are correct. So definitely do a review of it before you hit submit, just to see if there's anything that jumps out at you that you may have missed. If you do see something that maybe does need corrected that you missed, just click update budget, and that is going to take you back into the editable version of that, so that you can make any corrections that you may need to do. So once everything looks all in order, you've got your narrative of your notes for all the line items, you've double checked everything looks to be exactly the way you feel it needs to be, then you just submit it. And that is going to then put it at level 1 review. One thing just quickly before Esther, do you have something?
Oh, I was just going to jump in on this slide, but if you wanted to add something else before I do that,
Yep.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. So just one thing, when you do submit it for review, just a little bit of information about how the review process goes. I talked earlier about you having a point of contact person at First Pick. That is going to be your level 1 reviewer. So the process of the budget approval does go through multiple levels. So you have your level 1 reviewer who you're going to work very closely with on getting everything just in order on how it needs to be in your budget. That gets approved. Once they feel that it is ready to go, they are going to do approval. Then it goes to level 2 review, which is also at First Pick. That's going to be just a little bit higher level. Again, just an additional set of eyes on something, making sure, because we're all just people, and every once in a while we do miss stuff. So the level 2 reviewer just takes another look, makes sure that something didn't inadvertently get missed or put in a little correctly, or maybe need a little clarification on, because as a level 1 person works with you, they're going to become very familiar with you, with your program, with what you're trying to do. And so they're going to pretty much understand what you have in your budget and why you have it. But then the level 2 person looks at it, and because they haven't been as intricately involved, there may be some stuff that isn't quite clear to them, and in which case we're going to need, that's where the additional notes come in, because it's always good that everybody, that even someone that's not really closely familiar with your program, is able to understand what you have in your budget and why. So level 2 review, again, is at First Pick. Once it is approved at level 2, then it does go to NCAI. And it will have a programmatic review as well as financial review there. So there are four levels of approval that your budget does need to go through. Hopefully, once it gets passed up to NCAI, we always are really hopeful that we've done our job really well, but sometimes, again, NCAI does have a question or need a little additional clarification again on something. So that's kind of the process of what it goes through, just so you are aware that there are several steps of the approval process once it is submitted for review. And Esther, do you want to go ahead with what you were going to say on this slide?
Great, thank you. And I first want to say, I know we're a couple minutes over. We're almost finished, I promise. So thank you for hanging out with us for a little bit longer. So yes, I did want to just capture here. So we do have, as you'll see on this slide and what Robin mentioned earlier, we have a couple additional webinars that will happen kind of later in the process. But one that is not listed here, and I apologize, I meant to update this before we went live, but we do have a program implementation webinar coming up on May 11th. And we'll see if we can get that registration link dropped in the chat for you. But you should have also received the email that let you know about this webinar. Also has that information. We also have that you can register on our website as well. Again, that's www.tribalvictimservices.org. And once you go to that screen, you'll see there are two options. There's and actually, let me see. If you want to maybe jump to the next. Oh no, yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide while I'm chatting. maybe down to the contact information slide. Okay, great. Yes, so I see that we have the, great. Thank you to my colleague Abby at TLPI, put that registration link in the chat. So again, it's that webinar will be, more guidance about kind of the things to think about as you're actually getting your program off the ground. We'll talk a little bit about some of the requirements of the program. So just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. Again, that's May 11th at this same time. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and depending which time zone you're joining from, adjust accordingly. So we thank you all for joining us. We really look forward to working with you. As I mentioned, we are in the process of reviewing the applications that have already been submitted. We hope to get notifications out soon. And then once you do, you'll be able to start in this whole process. We are going to post this webinar, the recording of the webinar online, so you can easily go back and access it. And please feel free to reach out with any questions in the meantime. And then here on the screen is the contact information for all of us. If you, again, please feel free to reach out to any of us. And if we can't answer your question, we'll direct you to someone who can. And with that, I don't see any questions in the chat. So again, thank you all for joining. I know this is a lot of information and seems very early, but once you do get your award notifications and get your logins, you'll go ahead and get started on this process. And hopefully in the meantime, you can start thinking through and kind of transitioning your summary budget into what this detailed budget might look like. So thank you again. I think we can go ahead and close out again. Thank you for staying with us as we went a few minutes over. And hope you have a great rest of the week.